all the best desserts. We'd often sit and we'd finish these giant puzzles in between cooking lessons, or Grandpa would take me fishing by the river that ran right next to the house. Today, my kids would recall many of the same memories if they were asked to talk about our family. Now, which of those two brief introductions to my family are you likely to remember in a week? And which one provides you more information? Now, one is the list of stats about me. It's full of information that actually tells you very little about who I am as a person. Two is from personal experience. It provides a glimpse into my communal identity, how my grandparents passed on their traditions, and over the course of time, if we were to continue conversations, you'd probably hear bits and pieces of my life that give you many of the same stats as the short list, but you'd have a much fuller picture. You'd likely find that we have more in common than we do different, and you'd remember more in the long run. Now, over the course of our interactions, you'd probably come to be able to give the elevator speech on my behalf. Say you were introducing me to someone, but the fullness of our relationship comes from the stories, not the elevator speech. And I believe that the same holds true when we talk about our shared identity in the Christian faith. Many of us can give the elevator speech, but how many of us can share a story about a Savior the way we know our spouse, our kid, our best friend? That's the way I believe God called us to know Him. And a perfect example of this is found in an experience that my husband and I had with an organization called Story Runners. They're part of Crew. Their mission is to reach language groups in a format they understand. In their context, they're reaching oral people groups with no written language. They've taken the Bible and they've turned it into something called The Promise, a set of 40 stories that tell the story of the Bible from creation to the return of Christ, with a focus on the redemptive nature of God's plan. I first learned about this organization about 3 years ago when my husband and I had a chance to attend a School of Storying event in Orlando. This event takes place over the course of a week, and during that time, participants learn all 40 stories. Now, to add a little more to my story, my husband and I are very different when it comes to how we learn. I lean heavily on reading and writing as my preferred learning method. My husband is audio-visual and kinesthetic. In many ways, he's the perfect example of the 80% who prefer audio-visual methods today. He's an extremely smart man, he is consistently learning, and he has an ability to make instant connections with people. But I can count on one hand the number of books I think he's read in the 20 years of our marriage. I never realized how different our learning styles really were and their impact until I was forced to go through a week with a course taught first and foremost as spoken and experiential. The first ground rule of the week almost had me walking out. There would be no taking notes, no pieces of paper handed out to remind you of the steps that would follow. Everything was audio. Over the course of the week, I struggled to learn the stories without converting them to almost regurgitating the stories word for word from past readings. I can now tell you from personal, uncomfortable experience that method of storytelling doesn't work well, especially with people who don't already have some experience with the Bible. My husband, on the other hand, thrived. He was in his element. He could hear a story and naturally turn around and tell it to someone. 3 years later, and he can still tell you those stories. Compared to my husband's natural, animated stories, I sounded like a monotone robot. I'd like to think I've gotten better or spoken.bible wouldn't exist, but I'll leave that up to debate. At the end of the class, he told me something that completely changed my perspective on how the church teaches the Bible. As we were driving home that last night, he admitted to me that it was the first time in his life, having grown up in the church, that he ever felt the Bible related to him. He'd grown up on weekly sermons, running the gamut from verse by verse to thematic to narrative to topical teaching, but not one of them impacted his life the way a story simply told did. As we drove home that night, we talked about what made the difference. First, the story was simple. It didn't have a bunch of big words or complex information. Second, it was experiential. As the story unfolded, he could envision himself as one of the people in the story and the places. He could feel what they felt, think about their actions as if he was right there. Third, he could see its application to an immediate behavior or conversation in his daily life, or how it applied to life today if he was asked. Fifth, the stories were bite-sized. They were about 2 to 3 minutes long, and they used a range of modes, audio, video, kinesthetic, to help the hearer cement the story for future recall. In the education world, they call this chunk-based learning using multiple modalities. Skills are broken down into smaller pieces that can be built on gradually over time using multiple modes to help solidify the content. This same idea is what's behind things like Khan Academy, Udemy, and Common Core. Yes, it's not all bad. It's built on solid findings for teaching today's multimodal students. And many newer Christian offerings you probably use are built on this same idea. YouVersion's reading plans, the Bible Project's videos, Dwell, they all take a large topic and they break it down into pieces. They also all use multiple modes for teaching the same information. Many of these use video, whether it's animated, whiteboard, screen share, even a talking head. They use audio. You're listening to a speaker talk about what's on the video, tell the story of the video animation, or perhaps just audio alone. They're often accompanied by written transcripts, and they have exercises for you to complete to encourage active physical interaction with the content. They tend to use some level of organizational structure that brings the content down to manageable sizes that can be navigated, rewatched, watched outside of the whole or as part of the whole, watched in a few minute pieces or in binge watching mode. In many ways, Burger King's old "have it your way" motto is the new learning strategy. These characteristics of learning today should inform our answer to how we preach each week and our answer to how do we engage our congregation to engage with the Bible themselves. For those that are readers, the linear sequential model works. But here's the really kind of cool thing about the impact of social media, YouTube, and other digital communication mediums that have impacted the way we learn. Even those who are literate are shifting to processing knowledge in more oral culture ways. We're in an age where most people would fit Walter Ong's definition of post-literate. Even when they can read, they choose not to. They choose to gain their knowledge through other modes. Shifting to more experiential, participatory, communal modes is gaining traction. And this shift impacts how we define Bible engagement. If we open our understanding of the inputs to Bible engagement, the modes that we can use, from written to oral to video to participatory, it also calls us to ask what the outputs are. Is it knowing the Bible, being able to summarize the Bible, interacting with all of the Bible, parts of the Bible, or is it knowing how the Bible shows us our communal history and the characteristics that set us apart from a society for a greater mission? Is it knowing the application of the Bible and being able to live out that application? Is it being able to have a conversation with someone who doesn't know the Bible and being able to adequately point them to the Bible and, more importantly, the Savior it introduces to and draws us deeper into relationship with? I believe the answer is all of those. If we know our story one piece at a time, slowly adding each story into what we understand our Christian community to be and the relationship Christ calls us to have with Him, it not only allows us to grow personally and communally, it allows a natural conversation to happen to help others also find answers in our faith. If that's the case, encouraging Christians to enter into the story of the Bible through any mode and in smaller, more frequent encounters becomes a natural progression, and the church begins to return to how our story was shared for years before the printing press and widespread reading. In fact, if you'd like to learn more about Spoken Bible and experience the impact of a story told simply, I'd encourage you to visit spoken.bible/Easter and check out our new Easter series, which is available for free. Hi, my name is Jennifer Miles. I'm the founder of Spoken Bible, a site designed to help people learn, apply, and confidently share the stories of the Bible through weekly 2 to 3 minute stories and resources that are easily learned, naturally retold, culturally relevant, and biblically accurate. The site launched earlier this year, and we publish 4 to 8 news stories a month. Once complete, roughly 75% of the Bible will be available in short story form. Today, I'd like to share with you how Spoken Bible came to be and how understanding the shift that is occurring in learning styles to a more oral visual preference, akin to what Robert Hyman first coined as edutainment, impacts not only the modes we use to share the Bible, but also how we approach sharing the Bible in a more visual edutainment society. Spoken Bible is the result of approximately the last 4 years of research done while completing my doctorate of ministry. I've spent the last 10 years or so in the digital ministry space, and I've really sought to understand how communication changes over the last 30 years or so have impacted other socially driven fields like education and social movements, when it comes to teaching and engaging with new knowledge, along with how growth and traction in various social movements in a digital age occur. In many ways, the church is a social movement that follows social movement theory patterns. And Bible engagement is one of the primary tools we have for transferring our faith from one person to the next. The outcome of that research led me down a path that examined the efforts of the church to get people engaged in the Bible, both from a relational aspect, how do we define Christian worldview, the community of believers, and their interaction with those within and outside the church, and how do we teach the Bible today? Through sermons, discipleship or small groups, reading plans, and other formats. At a summary level, what I find outside the church and other socially driven fields were 3 fundamental shifts. First, that people are reading less and consuming content through audio and visual means more. People who prefer visual and oral learning methods now make up roughly 80% of the US population. Second, we tend to consume information by creating a mental index of how to search for knowledge when we need it, rather than retaining it for recall. I like to say we all have a Google prosthetic that has replaced our internal recall, but is significantly larger and available on demand. This is true of education, of workplace knowledge, of hobby or interest-based knowledge. Almost any category of information is now approached this way. Third, we've shifted to prioritizing experiences and connecting with others based on a single shared interest, and we tend to view others as more one-dimensional. People are either like us or they're not like us. We've moved face-to-face relationships from a primary position in our lives to a secondary position in our lives. You might be asking yourself at this point, how do these shifts relate to scripture engagement? Well, I think these 3 shifts have fundamentally changed the way the church, and more specifically, the people in the church, interact with, understand, and live out the Bible. In essence, people are reading the Bible less. They're more likely to create their own custom belief systems and subsequently their own Christian view of the world. And they're more likely to experience Christian community outside the traditional church. If we're to address these changes, the church has to re-embrace the methods found when the story of God was still primarily an oral story versus a written one, and adapt them for a digital age. Well, my research took me down several paths. I'd like to focus today on literacy and what it means for Bible engagement. Many pastors I've talked to have struggled with the idea of embracing a spoken Bible. So I want to talk just a bit about what I really mean when I say that and why I'm putting my efforts there. I'm not saying we should stop trying to get people to read the Bible. I want people to. I am saying that as people read less and rely more on audio, visual, and relationship means to learn the Bible, the medium that people learn the content of the Bible is shifting as well. One of the biggest things I found while trying to understand why Bible engagement was down was that it's not just Bible engagement that's down. People truly do spend less time reading across the board. And one of the consequences of that is that reading comprehension levels aren't what you might expect them to be. By itself, it isn't surprising that people aren't reading. We spend more time online. We're surfing, we're watching TV or YouTube if you're younger, you're working. Essentially, you're maintaining constant connection with something or someone else. In fact, in several surveys done by Pew Research over the last 5 years, they ask people to self-report their reading habits. They show that roughly 72% of the US adult population have read at least part or all of one book in the last year. To put that a different way, just over 1 in 4 people haven't read a book at all in the last year. If you break it down a little bit farther, 1 in 5 people have read 1 to 3 books, 3 in 20 have read 6 to 10 books, and 1 in 4 have read more than 11. While most people are at least reading, only 25% read on average a book a month, and just under 50% read fewer than 3 books. And the survey was on reading at least part of the book. When it comes to reading the Bible specifically, only 35% of adults read the Bible at least once a week, 10% once or twice a month, and 45% never engage with the Bible. And it's helpful to note that the younger you are, the less likely you are to read the Bible. All in all, this doesn't sound horrible, but how often and how much you read have an impact on reading comprehension. And literacy is really a two-part act. It's both being able to read and being able to comprehend what you read. In studies done over the last 15 years by the Department of Education and the Program for International Assessment of Adult Competencies, it's a mouthful, reading comprehension levels were assessed for adults of various ages, educational level, ethnicity, and gender. The results have actually remained relatively consistent across each of the surveys. Overall, 57% of adults 16 and older can read and comprehend at an immediate or proficient level, or roughly 1 in 2 adults, and only 13% can read and engage with what they read at a proficient level. You might say, well, this doesn't sound too bad. Intermediate sounds like it's higher up there, but the DOE has defined 4 levels of reading. The first one is below basic, those who are non-literate, along with those who can locate information in short prose. Think of things like determining a dosage on a prescription bottle or signing a form. Basic is the next level, and these are people who can perform everyday tasks like finding information in a pamphlet, using a TV guide, and comparing ticket prices. Intermediate is the next level, and this level is the one most people would consider the start of literacy. People in this category can perform more moderately challenging literacy activities. These abilities include reading more dense text, making inferences, and identifying cause and effect. Sample tasks include consulting reference materials to find a key piece of information or finding a location on a map. This is really the very start of where someone can read a book, summarize it, determine intent, and provide a plot summary. The highest level is proficient. People on this level can perform more complex and challenging literacy activities. Their abilities include reading longer, abstract texts that require one to synthesize information and make complex inferences, along with integrate multiple pieces into a synthesized analysis. Sample tasks here might include comparing differing viewpoints in similar tasks and interpreting a table of information containing multiple pieces of data. By these definitions, if we had to classify our expectation of those who read the Bible in their ability to read, summarize, and apply its content to their life, we'd probably say, as a church, we expect our congregation to be somewhere in the high, intermediate to proficient range. So let me say those stats again. 57% of adults can read and comprehend at an intermediate or proficient level, and only 13% are in the proficient level. Our expectation as pastors and leaders in the church doesn't match today's reality. What's more is that we continue to create systems and teach the Bible in ways that still assume our congregation are readers, and more importantly, are literate readers. So what does this really mean for the church at large? Well, first, we need to ask ourselves from this question: what does this mean for how we preach each week? Second, we need to ask, how does this change the way I encourage my congregation to engage with the Bible? And then lastly, I think we also need to ask, What is Bible engagement? What are the inputs and what are the outputs that we seek when we say Bible engagement? So, to that first question, what does this mean for how we preach each week? Pastors as a whole are highly literate and they preach using communication methods based on literacy and print media. Their sermons tend to be based on linear, sequential, and abstract thought. One common way that pastors adjust to today's culture is by designing their sermon to be comprehended by a 10-year-old. You often hear, or someone with a 6th grade reading level. However, when a highly literate individual prepares material for someone with a 6th grade reading level, they're unlikely to take learning style into account.